Ghost Hunting in New England,
your favorite spooky podcast.
Hello and happy Wednesday. Welcome to this week's episode of Ghost Hunting in New England with your hosts Amelia
and Beth.
And today we are doing something very cool and interesting.
Like we've never done before, right?
Once in a lifetime.
We have with us this week, I am so excited about this. This is one of my former teachers. This is Steve Dooner. He is a professor of literature, and he has a very keen interest in spooky stories, spooky tales, and the history of such literature. So Steve, welcome.
Welcome.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
I was just so pleased to hear you did a show on Lizzie Borden because I wrote a play about Lizzie Borden in '99.
Oh my goodness.
I just revived it about 2 years ago at the Company Theater in Norwell. I had about 4,000 people come see it the first time and about another 4,000 the second time. So I actually used ghost elements in my story, which was Sarah Borden, the mother of Lizzie, used that sort of specter of the haunted mother figure in the story, and then a lot of other fun things. So yeah, I've written a great fun piece on Lizzie Borden that I had a great deal of fun with, and I teach a course in literature of the supernatural that I created at Quincy College, and that's so this is a long time interest in this. So my graduate work when I was a young grad student was on the romantic writers like Mary Shelley, and so they always dealt with the supernatural, and they were always interested in the phenomena that went beyond the rational imagination. Yeah.
I mean, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is, most people think of it as just this story about a monster, but nobody knows that it's a monster who speaks French, right?
Yes.
The monster is much different than it was portrayed in the movies.
Yeah, it's a very literate story. And Mary Shelley, of course, she had lost her mother when she was about 8 days old. Her mother died of puerperal fever. And so she grew up always haunted by this extraordinary mother that she had, who was one of the greatest writers and greatest feminists of all time, Mary Wollstonecraft. And so her father would take her to her mother's grave, and she learned to write her name, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin originally. She learned to write her name by tracing her finger in her mother's gravestone.
That's both amazing and horrifying at the same time.
So she had a relationship with the dead all the time. And so when she finally wrote a story about a man, cutting together pieces of dead bodies and reanimating it with galvanism, it was a very interesting story. And it's also a story about motherhood because Mary had a mother that she never knew, and she might have felt a little bit abandoned. And Frankenstein in the story abandons his creature. That she spoke French and her mother knew French, and she was very much the monster girl, though she was not 8 feet tall and monstrous. She was nonetheless had a little bit of that inner monster inside of her because she was alone. And her father was a very stentorian fellow, and he just always was standoffish and very stoic. And though he was a good man, he never gave much affection. So she was a feral child.
Okay.
Wow.
But it wouldn't have been unusual in that day and age for fathers to not provide affection to their children at all.
No, not at all. But he also did two things, though. He raised her to be completely emancipated because her mother was the founder of feminism. And she felt completely emancipated, and so she ran away at 16. Eloped with a man who was, just left his wife, rushed a divorce, and she had two miscarriages before she wrote the book at 18 years old. So she'd already lost 2 children. And
oh my God.
And so when we meet the Mary Shelley, who's 18 to 19, who writes Frankenstein, she's already lived one heck of a life by that point.
I am blown away because I had no idea she was 18 when she wrote that.
Yeah, she wrote Frankenstein at 18 years old.
That is remarkable. Wow.
And 18 to 19. And she Yeah, it was published, I think, when she was 19. And it started when she was at the Via Diodati with Lord Byron, the mad Lord Byron, the great romantic figure. And they all decided they would tell ghost stories one night. And Byron started one on a vampire, never finished it. Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley's husband that she eloped with, started a ghost story but failed. And then another fellow, Dr. Polidori, did write a famous book called The Vampire, or The Vampire. And then Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein.
Wow. That's incredible. I really didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
I didn't know that either.
It was a creepy summer. You know how we are all in plague right now? The famous volcano Krakatoa had erupted. So the whole world was gray all the time.
Wow.
And so for a whole year, it was felt like winter. It was called The Year Without a Summer. That was 1816 when she wrote the book. So it's a super history of Mary Shelley, but that's just fun to think about. And she I mean, it's not exactly a ghost story, but the very beginning of the story where at chapter 5, when he animates the creature, is great horror.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So we can, but if you want to know about some fun ghost stories, this could be a great segue into that. I mean, all the romantics, they were very much interested, really opening up the imagination, because if we only stay with the rational world, the world stays the way it is. That's the problem with reason. You need imagination to transform the world, to change the world. So it's, if we just live in a rational world where everything's logical, we're trapped. But the imagination opens up all sorts of things, but it also opens up terrifying things. It awakens our senses. And you only have to think about how ghost stories often come to us through the senses, like a single sense, like you hear a cry or a voice, or you hear a voice in a room that shouldn't be there, or you see something spectral in the distance, or sometimes you feel a brush of air go by you. Those are all feelings, and you have to think about your own senses. When Samuel Taylor Coleridge would write The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, he said that there are more invisible things than there are visible. That we have to open ourselves up to that invisible spectrum, that invisible world. So that's one of the things he was driving at with that famous poem. But when we get into the real ghost story, I mean, who are the great architects of the ghost story? There's so many. Charles Dickens wrote a great ghost story called The Signal Man. And he wrote The Christmas Carol. And his ghost story, of course, turns out to be a very interesting thing, because I think we're supposed to take that it is a ghost story. I don't think, how Scrooge wakes up and you have some question, was that all just a dream? We learn things about Belle, the woman he was once in love with, who had a family. He saw a whole scene that he couldn't have seen. He saw his nephew's niece, and he couldn't have seen them. He knew his nephew, but he couldn't have known the niece. He never went to the wedding. So it's a very interesting thing. Scrooge got insight, and he got insight from something spectral. And that leads us to think that the ghosts that Dickens talked about certainly do awaken the conscience of Ebenezer Scrooge, but they also show. It could be the guilt ghost. That's one kind of ghost, just your own guilty conscience. But there seems to be a little bit more about those ghosts. When Shakespeare would use the ghost of Banquo in Macbeth, it's not clear if that's just Macbeth's guilty imagination, because he's the only one who sees it. But when the ghost appears in Hamlet, the father, that's a ghost, because everybody sees it. He only speaks to him. So Shakespeare understood that there were both kinds of ghosts. The ghosts that our imaginations, when our imagination is overwrought, can create as a hallucination. And also something more that goes beyond rational explanation. Oh, and now go ahead.
And they draw out that feeling within you of you want to know more, but you're too scared to know more. And so it definitely creates that conflict within you as a person as you're reading these, that you're like, I can't put it down, but I don't want to keep going. It's scary. Yeah.
Well, that's an amazing thing, because my favorite ghost stories, I mean, it literally is painful to turn the page, but you have to, right? And I can think of a few that really get me like that, one is by Stephen King. It's called The Man in the Black Suit.
The Man in the Black
Suit. Man in the Black Suit.
Okay.
And it's about a boy who it's set up like a fairy tale. Don't go down past past there to the river to go fishing. And of course, the boy goes down. He crosses the threshold, and he goes to the place he isn't supposed to go. And that's when he opens himself up to the supernatural. And, that's a scene in The Exorcist, too, when, you have to invite the ghost or the demon in by playing the Ouija board in that movie, right? But you have to do something that crosses the threshold. Ghosts don't visit you unless you want to visit them in some way. So the boy goes down to the river, and that's when the man in the black suit shows up. And I don't want to spoil that story, but it's easily one of the scariest stories I've ever read. The ending of that story haunts me now. So if you want a recommendation about of a really terrifying story, Stephen King's The Man in the Black Suit. Another really, really great ghost story is The Judge's House by Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula. And that's a story about a man who's a skeptic, who puts up all sorts of rational walls about the supernatural, decides that it's no problem for him to stay in this house where a hanging judge used to live, a man who certainly went to hell for all the innocent people he killed. And so he decides to stay in this man's house, and the house is filled with rats, and just rats are everywhere, everywhere in every corner. And the story keeps building like that. I won't again. You pass page 2 of that story, but a really great story. And but do you guys have favorite ghost stories? Because I want to hear. Do you have any favorite ghost stories that come to mind when you think about your favorite literary ghost stories?
So I can't say that off the top of my head I really have like a favorite literary ghost story. I have a number of scary stories that I've enjoyed over the years, but they're not necessarily ghost stories. Like anything by Poe has always been really good. I'm surprised that I have never heard about The Man in the Black Suit, because I've read most of Stephen King. Is it a full-length novel or is it a short story?
Short story.
Okay.
And it's so intense. It's so intense.
All right. So one of my favorites when I was teaching was I would teach Three Skeleton Key by George. His name's escaping me right now. It's a French name, but the rats. It was all about rats at a lighthouse, and it was terrifying. And every year at Halloween, I would always teach a scary story. But obviously the Legend of Sleepy Hollow,
I was going to say, I'm surprised you didn't pick that as your favorite, because I feel like you talk about that one all the time.
I feel like I do too, but sometimes I just have to talk my way into what I think, right? The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is a big favorite of mine too. I enjoyed teaching that one a lot, and that's been on my list of places to go and visit.
Well, the other night, as a celebration of autumn, and because we couldn't really have Halloween parties this year, a group of friends of mine at social distance all gathered together in a big circle around a fire pit. We read ghost stories. It was only about 5 or 6 of us because of the new state limits on party attendance. But one of the first things we read was the section of Legend of Sleepy Hollow when he's going home from Katrina Van Tassel's party, and he is riding on gunpowder his horse when all of a sudden the headless horseman appears. It's certainly one of the great little protracted sections in Irving. You really do get the feeling of a real ghost story, and as Ichabod dashes that bridge. But what's interesting is by the end, of course, Irving kind of undercuts it later on. It might not really be a ghost story. It might be Brom Bones chasing a guy out of town. But he leaves it to you. He decides. Well, you decide what you think it was. But that's not fair, because he really did tell that section of the story with incredible, vivid, ghostly detail, and right to the point where he felt the headless horseman's horse breathing down his neck. Do you want, Amelia? Do you have a favorite ghost story that you love?
Oh gosh, don't put me on the spot with this. I don't know. I am also a big fan of Stephen King short stories. I don't read a lot of long books because I can't focus, but I do love short stories. So
she's got a bachelor's in photography.
Oh, well, I've got some short stories.
She's a visual sort of person.
And have you ever done ghost photography? I mean, I'm sure. Have you picked up anything on a camera?
I have not picked up a ghost on camera yet, although it is something I look forward to doing someday. I've done like ghostly photo shoots, in the past with people. But no, the closest I've come is I have like security camera footage in my cafe of we thought a ghost like threw a plate one time. And we caught that on the security, but I don't have too many that I've shot.
It was really a disgruntled employee, but yeah.
One of my favorite ghost stories. Do you know Shirley Jackson wrote The Lottery?
Yes.
Yeah, that wonderful, disturbing. That's not a ghost story, by the way. That's like
not even a little. That's just terrifying.
That's just a terrifying nightmare story.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote one of the great ghost stories, which is The Haunting of Hill House. And at the first,
I'm watching that on Netflix.
Yes, and you're going to see The Haunting of Bly Manor after that. Don't miss The Haunting of Bly Manor. I'm loving it. It's a version of the great ghost story, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. And so The Haunting of Bly Manor is hot right now. The opening of Haunting of Hill House, if you don't mind, I'll read it, all right? It's just very short. It says,
go for it.
No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. And it's such a great beginning of a book, but it's also this idea that we have to go crazy, that we can't live 100% of the time sane, that we have to go home and do our favorite thing and, be silly and talk, silly talk and just goof around. Because if we try to stay sane all the time, like professors and English teachers and such, we will go nuts. You know what I mean? And this is the problem when your job stretches 60, 70, 80 hours a week, is that, you have to be sane for that much longer. But it's great when you can just let go. That's why we all need vacations and dreams and sleep. And so Shirley Jackson, of course, writes one of the great ghost novels, which is The Haunting of Hill House, which is far better to read than any of the movie versions. I haven't seen the Netflix movie version. I should check that one out, and maybe I'll revise my opinion. And the turn of the screw is a great ghost story, kind of a classic ghost story about a governess who is sent to a house to take care of two unruly children that nobody else can take care of. And the suggestion is that the children are haunted, possessed. It's a very interesting story. So check out The Haunting of Bly Manor.
Okay.
And the other thing, just real quick, and I'm going to give you a list of all kinds of cool stories when we end, I think. There's a great writer named Jeffrey Ford who writes stories about demons and monsters.
Oh, we should have mentioned that. We don't do demons.
You don't do demons.
No, but we can for this. No, we're just joking.
It's one of our long running jokes.
Well, he does nice demons. He does some quirky, interesting, like he has some gentlemanly demons with style and panache. But he also has a lot of ghosts, and he has a lot of ghost stories. He once wrote, if pressed, most people can come up with at least one paranormal, supernatural, inexplicably weird experience they've had. Maybe just something from the category, the banal of the paranormal, but unsettling or revelatory nevertheless. So he said that we almost all have some story about some paranormal experience. I was just doing a haunted ghost tour over in Hingham at Halloween, and we were taking people around to all the haunted sites of Hingham. And there were a number of houses there where people say that there are spectral visitations and weird things occur. Crystals fall from chandeliers. The hooks that the crystals sat on straighten themselves out, bizarrely enough. Just odd things, chandeliers and moving lamps. Those you could call that the banal of the paranormal, because those are just artifacts. But you haven't really seen the ghost itself. Jeff Ward says when he hears these stories, he always squirrels them away in his memory. But then he also notices how we tell stories, and I'll just paraphrase. He says that a lot of people blurt out the most important part first. Like they say, I saw a ghost that was in my room at midnight and it stroked my face, or something like that. And they blurt out the most important part first, and then they go back and they tell the story. Mm-hmm. When you read a story like by Poe or Dickens or anybody, what you do is you don't blurt that out. You save that for the end. And you have to go do this slow, long tease. What makes a great ghost story is that it teases and it just builds up slowly, slowly, slowly until what you thought might be true is true. And that's really, really the art of the spooky. So, but then Jeff Ward added the idea that still, he said, the stories that we just tell have a kind of charm. And he would love for somebody to collect just the story of a book of just people's anecdotes about ghosts. They might not be told artfully, but they'll be told with some kind of creepy honesty. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. We call them the drive-by ghostings. Maybe someday we'll publish them all.
Ooh, see? Somebody's actually asking for that book, so that's something to think about.
There you go. We're on it. So, I think, Amelia, we figured out how the podcast can make money.
Hey.
No, if they're really popular, definitely get people to, contribute. Maybe you can compile them. Mm-hmm. Really, I think that guy who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul did pretty much that. And I think there might be a great audience for the many ghost stories that are all around us. Mm-hmm. How many areas have some of those same ghost stories, like the woman in white?
Oh, everyone has a woman in white. All over the world, they have them in different ways. It's incredible. They're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And it's, and there's usually a story about it, like a woman who's a sailor who went away and, she haunts the beach because her sailor never came home, or mm-hmm. something like that. There's a woman in white in the Hingham Cemetery that was recorded back in 1850 or 1860. A writer recorded the woman in white there. And there's a woman in white in Situate, I think, or Cohasset, one of those two, mm-hmm. right, locally. And so we constantly get these. Yep.
There's one in Hull too.
And there's one in Hull too. So is this something that, is part of like our unconscious, or is this part of something much bigger, or is it just a common story? I was thinking as I was telling the story of the woman in white in Hingham, that white of course makes sense because a shroud was white. Mm-hmm. And of course, the cerements of the dead, when you're wrapped as the dead, that's always white. So it could be just a ghost. When I was a kid, I would always see Charlie Brown going out for Halloween, and he would wear his sheet with his cutout eyes. And, I got a rock. I don't know if you remember Charlie Brown's yep. Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
And and did you ever go as a sheet ghost when you went for Halloween? The classic.
Me and Paul and I this year, we just because we couldn't go anywhere, we put sheets over our heads and then threw sunglasses on and just for ourselves.
That was great. One year I went as ghost and ghost chaser. So I had like a trench coat and a fedora and like glasses. Mm-hmm. And then over that I put a ghost and with like dark sunglasses. And then I would run through the room one way, and then I would run back in and I'd be the ghost chaser. It was very dumb. But I had a lot of fun doing it. You have a ghost tattoo, Beth? I love that.
Yeah. I just got it yesterday.
You just got it yesterday?
Yep.
By the way, the ghost tattoo is a fantastic title of a story that you should write, by the way. The ghost tattoo. It sounds like there should be a story called that already. There's a story which I really love. It's one of my favorite creepy ghost stories, and it's called A Whistle, and I'll Come to You, My Lad. A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Boy, by M.R. James. A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Boy. I want to make sure it's boy and not lad. Hold on. No, it's lad. Sorry. Oh, I got it right the first time. A whistle and I'll come to you, my lad. And it's a great, great ghost story. And what makes it really great is that the ghost in it is a classic sheet ghost. I mean, nice. It's like, and you think that can't be scary. A sheet ghost can't be scary. And by the end of this story, you are scared out of your wits by a sheet ghost. It's that good. It's absolutely wonderful. I won't reveal why it's so scary, but you'll find out. And it's the great M.R. James. The time of year that we're talking right now used to be celebrated in England as the ramp up to Christmas time, and there were always a tradition of Christmas ghost stories. And what you would do is at Christmas time, you told ghost stories. Now, a lot of people don't think, oh, Christmas isn't for ghost stories, there's just the Holy Ghost or something like that. But interestingly enough, it's a long, old tradition to tell ghost stories because people felt, because the year was getting darker, because of All Souls Day and All Saints Day and Halloween, there was a period between Halloween and Christmas when all the specters were sort of on the earth and all the ghosts of the past, and it was sort of like almost judgment time. And it was this time, November to December, that they felt that you were closest to the edge, the other side, or the spectral barrier, or the doorway to the other side. And so it is November, and also bleak December, as poets say, that really becomes the ghost story time. I absolutely love the idea of the ghost story at this time of year because M.R. James, Charles Dickens, even Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, they all tell ghost stories at this time of year. And we keep regenerating them. Scrooge, there's 1,000 versions of Scrooge. I remember there's a woman Scrooge, there's a Bill Murray's Scrooge. We keep retelling the Christmas ghost story. James Joyce wrote a story called The Dead, which was set at Christmas time. And it wasn't so much a ghost story, but it said that everybody's haunted at Christmas time because we think of all the relatives who didn't make it this year, And so when you think about that, you think, okay, it's a time of year because you're getting sentimental, because your heart is aching a little bit and you're feeling so much that people start, to really see things and they start to feel things. And this is the perfect time of year to tell these stories. So in England, especially, there was a long-standing tradition of getting your gas light, or what is it, your kerosene light, and tell ghost stories by at this time, and from Halloween to Christmas. The other thing that I loved when I was a kid was that whenever the power would go out, that was the best time of all. Because
absolutely.
Yeah. Did you love that? Because what happened is, what did you do? What did you do?
I would go and cuddle under my sheets and grab a flashlight and read my favorite scary book that I had laying around.
That's what I did. And we had kerosene lamps in the house, so we would turn.
Oh, very smelly.
Yeah, very smelly. But we would.
I would not want that under the sheets with me.
And they would always leave like a little dirty ring on the ceiling, but or a story like any of Edgar Allan Poe's great stories, like Ligeia, which is one of the great ghost stories, or also The Fall of the House of Usher, just great ghost stories. Do you like Poe? You like Poe, Amelia?
I do, yeah. I like Poe a lot.
Yeah, he's great. And, he deals with the uncertainty of our own thoughts, the uncertainty of our own minds. Sometimes it's just about alcoholism. He writes a wonderful story called The Black Cat, which this guy is trying to kill a supernatural black cat, but he's not. And the reality is really dark. That's a realistic story that he tells. It's really about a man dealing with alcoholism. And he tells another story called Ligeia, which is really about a guy's opium addiction. But he also gets at some of these ideas of being haunted in The Raven, and also his wonderful story, Fall of the House of Usher, where real supernatural things happen because of guilt and shame. The Madeline Usher returns, and she must return. And of course, Stephen King would borrow the ending of Fall of the House of Usher for his great book, Carrie. Carrie ends with, I guess King didn't have an answer for how to end the story. He had just written The Stand, and he's moving on to Carrie, and he needed an ending. So he said, well, what about one of the best ghost story endings of all time? So he borrowed the ending of Fall of the House of Usher and just moved it very cleverly into Carrie. And it becomes a really great ending. Twice the same ending. And King was such a master, he knew who to borrow from. And he's written some of the great stories of our era. So that's a really great thing. I love a lot of his short stories, especially. But, some of The Shining is a masterpiece of ghost storytelling, of ghost story literature. And I'm trying to think, some of his others, so, he'll fluctuate between science fiction and fantasy and also pure horror and also realism. So, like in The Body, his wonderful Stand By Me. But I love Stephen King. That's really great stuff. How about the writer Bram Stoker for a second? Have you read Dracula, the original Dracula?
Yes.
You have? Okay.
Yes.
You have? It's great. It's really disturbing. There's a whole, it's told as a series of different narrators. So it's great for somebody, who doesn't want to read a big long book, actually, because every little section of the book is another little book by somebody else. My favorite part of Dracula was always the ghost story part, which was this section called the Log of the Demeter, which is a boat sailing from Greece, from Transylvania, and it doesn't know that it has Dracula on board. His coffin is down there. And every night, one by one of the sailors goes missing as the specter rises and takes one after another. And the captain dismisses it at first, but slowly he becomes more and more aware of the terrible reality that he's dealing with. But then, when Dracula does arrive in England, he haunts one woman in particular, Lucy Westenra, and he makes her his slave. And there's a nightmare scene where she's called the Blúffa, the beautiful lady, and the Hampstead Horror. She rises from her grave. She's killed by Dracula. She rises from her grave every night to take a child and drink the blood of a child. And when they finally find her and they drive the stake through her heart, she actually has a child in her arms.
Oh, that's awful.
It's awful. It's terrifying. It's one of the scariest books I've ever read. There's a whole nightmare scene where Dracula's wives come in Transylvania. Dracula's wives come in and they throw a sack. Dracula throws a sack in the corner. You hear babies crying. He's going out abducting babies so that he can feed his vampire wives. It's really terrifying. It's scary. It's scary stuff. Dracula is very disturbing. So with that in mind, when you read his ghost story, The Judge's House, be aware that it is very scary stuff. This guy went there into very dark places. Have you ever read H.P. Lovecraft?
Why were we talking about him? The Cryptonomicon, the Necronomicon.
Necronomicon, that's
Necronomicon.
Supposedly hidden in one of the colleges around here.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, it's likely that Lovecraft invented that, but people have pieced together from Lovecraft's fiction a Necronomicon nowadays. And of course, he wrote about this whole area. Instead of the Housatonic, he called it the Miskatonic. And he wrote about Rhode Island. And he actually had an area called Arkham, Massachusetts. And of course, the Batman comics, the Batman movies all have this place called Arkham Asylum. And they have video games like Arkham City and stuff like that. All of that refers to Lovecraft. And Lovecraft wrote a handful of some of the scariest stories of all time. He's come under great criticism lately because he has a lot of racist content in some of his stories, and he also was known for being, personally racist. He wrote some privately racist ideas. Some of his best stories don't touch on that much, which is great. There was an interesting writer named Alan Moore who said that we shouldn't cancel Lovecraft because his racism and his strange fear of everybody, and he was afraid of everybody. And what is racism but fear? Fear of that kind of person. He was afraid of Catholics. He was afraid of the Irish, especially, Beth. He didn't know what the Irish were. He was terrified of them.
Yeah, we're short and we'll put up with torture forever.
Lovecraft was terrified of the Irish, and of course he was racist, but he was also just generally bigoted and generally racist and generally afraid. And the great writer Alan Moore, who wrote Watchmen, said that maybe it was the fact that he was such a scaredy cat, scared of everything, scared of every kind of person he met, scared of everything different. He just wanted to live in his little province by himself. Maybe that's why he was able to get in touch with so much fear, because he was afraid. One of the scariest stories I've ever read in my life is actually one of his science fiction stories called The Color Out of Space, which, just to tell you a little bit about it, it's like a classic Stephen King device, too. It's about a meteor that falls from outer space and then slowly drives a family completely insane, like a good family, a local kind of family.
I've read that.
Yeah.
That sounds very familiar.
And it is, I won't, that's only the beginning of the story too, but the descriptions of the nightmarish effect of this supernatural force on this family is really terrifying. Really terrifying. There's some fun ghost stories too. There's a really great story about a ghost babysitter called The Specialist's Hat by Kelly Link. If you want to check out a really fun ghost story, read this one. Of course, the ending is very mysterious. Like a lot of ghost stories, it ends kind of ambiguously. And you'll have to figure out what it means. But it's a wonderful, wonderful story.
Babysitter's hat?
The specialist's hat.
The
specialist's hat. And the kids in the story most likely have a ghost babysitter. And she may have been murdered.
Ooh.
All right? So it's a great story. It's going to awaken a lot of the kinds of stories that you hear about this. When you have a house where somebody was murdered, or where you have somebody like the Borden murders, you have a lot of this stuff around. A really great recent story is by China Mieville, and it's called Details. And I know you don't do demons, but this one is about a sensitive, it's about a medium, and it's about a person who's sensitive to things that perhaps we shouldn't be sensitive to. You know, that there's a cost to being too sensitive to what's out there. And have you known any sensitives? People who are sensitive, especially sensitive to the supernatural?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who?
Well, us.
Some would say
Us.
we are some.
Oh, so you feel presences.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
And you feel like you've been visited more than once?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Many times. And see, once is enough for a lot of people.
Well, that's the thing about it though. Like you can't always just turn it off. Right? Like, and it's, you know, like I'll go places, and it wasn't until recently that I realized that so when you talk about the senses, I'm not a seer or a hearer. I'm a feeler. Like they come over and they touch me. Like I can feel them.
That's always an interesting thing in stories. Which sense is being made operational? Which sense is being activated? And there are all sorts of things. There are auditory ghosts, very common. You know, if you hear voices, cries.
They have medication for that now.
Yeah, I know, because a lot of times schizophrenia is hearing voices, right? But nonetheless, you know, sometimes it's totally rational people who hear the cry of a child, or something else, and then there's the sensitive to feeling and touch. What is something? Can you just tell me what are some of the feelings you have there? That freezes.
Like if somebody came over and just laid their hand on you. That's all.
Poe uses that in his story Ligeia. Every time Ligeia, who's supernatural, comes to visit the narrator, she puts her hand on his shoulder and turns, and he says,
well, I just used my shoulder because you can see it, but typically I actually feel it on my legs.
On your legs?
Yes.
That's really interesting. Is it when you're sleeping at night, or
when I go places? Like if I go to places that have a spirit that's there, they will touch me.
They'll touch you. How about you, Amelia? Does it come to your sense of touch, or something else?
So I had one of my best friends from high school actually passed away, and there were three of us. We were like the Three Musketeers, and me and Shelby, the other woman, we got into doing like Reiki. And this was a few months after our friend Devin had passed away. And we felt her hand on me while Shelby was doing something to me. And I opened my eyes and I said, "How did you touch three places at once?" And Shelby was just bawling. And she had seen Devin in front of us. And it was just this like incredible moment that we all shared together. And so, you know, that's happened. I've seen things. I hear things. I see people come to me in my dreams a lot. So all this different stuff has happened to me over the years.
Wow, I love that. It's what an amazing thing too to be that sense, to be awakened that way. The auditory sense fascinates me. That's what I'm most in tune with. And in the story "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad" by M.R. James, the skeptic character, the rationalist, is doing an archaeological dig, and he's doing a dig of a very old, like 100, 800, 900-year-old site. And he finds a whistle. that was used by the Knights Templar. And if you know about the Knights Templar, they were, this very strange order, mystic order, right? Mm-hmm. And he decides that, it's a good idea for him. He decides to blow the whistle. See, when you blow something very old, like an ancient whistle, imagine you blew a whistle from ancient Egypt, you don't know who you're calling. And that's the idea of the story. It's a really amazing story. I recommend that one heartily. And there's a lot of stories that are based on the idea of the demon lover. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a lover that you had in the past visiting you, or a lover who is there to take you away. This is one of my favorite ghost stories. Elizabeth Bowen's The Demon Lover, where she thinks she avoided the demon lover, but no, he comes back to get her. It's a very interesting thing. It's almost like that's about guilt. From your sinful past or something like that. That something's going to come back to haunt you and get you. Whenever I think about all of these ghost stories together, I think about how they work, and I think about things like you always need that in a classic movie or short story. You need that slow ramp up to the experience. Mm-hmm. And you have to have some point in which you move from ordinary reality of bologna sandwiches and peanut butter into this weirder world. And what is it that makes you step over into the weird? What makes you step into that stranger world? Now, when you have these experiences at night, Beth, do you go to a place, a graveyard or a haunted house, or is it?
So if Amelia and I are out like on a ghost hunt and there's something there, it will usually touch me. Let's see. The very first time it happened, I was actually a child. I was like 6 years old, and I was at my grandmother's house. She lived over in Quincy, and I was going up the stairs in the back hallway, and something that I couldn't see came along and just grabbed me right here and pushed me backwards back down the stairs. Whatever it was did not want me coming upstairs. And I found out later, like years and years later, that there were a lot of stories in that house about different ghosts, different spirits, different things that were unexplainable that happened in there. And so that was really the first time that I ever had something like that happen. But it's not something that I really pay close attention to. I will, if I'm feeling like, it usually starts off with, we describe it as a cat sitting on your chest.
Yes.
So, like I'll feel like a tightness, like just there's something going on, and then all of a sudden I'll start feeling, a hand on my leg. Or
have you ever seen the famous Fuseli painting called Nightmare, where there's a demon sitting on your chest?
Yes.
Have you seen this, Beth?
Thankfully, no.
He painted it twice. You know it, Amelia, right?
Yes.
Is it something Beth should not see?
You can see it.
Well, you should see it. Good.
It'll be fine.
It's very interesting. Fuseli is Fuseli or Li. It might be two L's or one, but Fuseli, and it's called Nightmare, a famous painting. Oh, and he's a little hairy guy sitting on your chest. Amelia, have you ever had?
It's trying to show me Fuseli.
So not only is that an unbelievable painting in kind of art history overall, but it's also interesting, and I'm just going to briefly tie this in, but a lot of sometimes when you go to certain types of mystics, especially some from the Romani culture, they use this painting to say, spiritually we can heal the demon on our chest, but we don't realize the one looking over our shoulder, and that this is the painting they actually use for that quite often.
Isn't that interesting? Fuseli was fascinated with he was a romantic who was interested in the irrational. A lot of these people did drugs. I don't know if you notice in both of the paintings that he painted of Nightmare, she's got a bottle of opium, of laudanum, on her night table. So sometimes people use substances to awaken, just like Indians, might use peyote or something like that. But what's weird about that painting is that he might have tried to attribute it to laudanum in the painting, but the image of the succubus and the incubus goes long before, goes way, way back. The idea of this little demon who can sit on your chest has been around for, there have been stories about this for thousands of years. So did you find it yet, Beth?
I did. I'm wondering why there's a horse in both of them as well. Are you going to get to that?
I will if you want, but
you covered pretty much everything else in the paintings. Yep.
Yeah, well, the horse is penetrating through a red draped curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And,
gotcha. All right, never mind.
Yeah, and if you kind of notice the shape of the red drapes, you might be able to gather something. And I don't know if your audience how mixed it is. I'm just going to say that much. Does that sound good?
That's enough. Yep.
All right. Yeah, and so some people see some Freudian elements to that aspect of it.
Yeah, we have a lot of kids that listen to our show too.
Yeah, and so I think we said that nice and safely.
Perfect.
And so one of the fascinating things is that those romantic poets were weird, and the artists too, and they were interested in a lot of the irrational elements of the psyche. But also that they did these things to open themselves up to things as well. And I don't recommend that myself, because I've always had enough imagination to do it without artificial stimulus. But there are traditions about that. Interestingly enough, another element of the story is tension, right? When you think of your favorite movies, you have to have some sense of jeopardy or fear. When you watch The Exorcist, one of the things it's a kid in jeopardy. And the stakes are extremely high. What will you do to save this child? And so, the conflict is there right away. And when you see some of those stories, have you seen The Witch?
Might need more detail than that.
It's called Witch. It's a movie that came out about 2 years ago.
Nope.
I haven't seen it.
It's a really wonderful, disturbing film. But it's about fears of witchcraft. And I have a lot of friends now who are Wiccans, so it is kind of funny to even think about being afraid of witches because I know people in covens. So it's not really something that I think of in those terms. But it's interesting to go back into our psyche when we were afraid of people who are different, and we were afraid of different ideas. And so that's part of it as well. And then there's a lot of things that are really common in the ghost stories, like guilt and sin and justice. And then also fear of death, and also just that some things can't be answered. I love all those things. Whenever I teach literature, those are some of my favorite things. As for what scares us, that's a totally different thing because there's plenty. I think I'm more scared by real things than I am by ghosts. The way people treat people and things that have been done on the planet to each other. Those scare me more than the idea that the world is less certain in its rational simplicity. When I look at those kind of normal naturalistic horrors, I've always been struck by what really is spooky. What really is spooky as opposed to just scary or fear inspiring. And I think that always has to do with shadows and what's hidden and doors that need to be opened and parts of ourselves that need to open up, and the idea that sometimes ghosts are bearing messages for us, and sometimes what we think is a monster is really an angel. Those are all things that appear in a lot of great ghost stories. There's one of my favorite. I want to get the author's name of it.
How many screens do you have going there?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I got one over here. But then I have a little book right here.
Oh, you have a book? Oh, I figured it was your phone. You were looking it up.
Old school. This is. I'm looking at the Oxford. What is it called? It's called the Oxford Book of Ghost Stories. So it's one of the books I teach. I'm going to see if I can hold it up. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, you can see. Yeah, I don't know. The Oxford Book of Ghost Stories. And these are old British ones. It has the monkey's paw, which you probably taught before.
Yep.
You know that one? And it has The Judge's House, and it has The Red Room by H.G. Wells, which is a really kind of interesting, scary story. And one of my favorites, The Demon Lover by Elizabeth Bowen. And May Sinclair, a great woman writer, wrote the story called The Victim, which has one of the best change-ups in all of literature, because you think it's the ghost that's scary, not in this story. And you think all the horrible things you see in the ghost story turn out to be not what you expect. So along that idea that sometimes ghost stories are about our own guilt coming through, the story of the victim actually gets us to this place where ghosts do have messages for us. This wonderful book by Jeff Vandermeer called The Weird, which has to do with some modern ghost stories by Stephen King and a few others. Some really great, creepy stories. And I can get into some of those if you want. But I've got a whole bunch. All right, you want to hear a couple more?
Yeah, go ahead.
Having fun?
Yep.
There's one ghost story.
I'm like legit like running out of space on my paper. And this is the big, huge legal size notepad too.
Sure. M.R. James, who wrote A Whistle When You Come to Me, A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, also wrote a tremendous story in this volume called The Weird, called Casting the Runes, which is kind of like a ghost adventure story in which somebody has to avoid a curse. And I don't know if you believe in curses, but
Amelia does. Let her turn her microphone on there.
Amelia, tell me about your.
I had the double mute going. Yes, I do believe in curses. I especially believe in the evil eye. That is something I've been dealing with a lot this year. And I do. I believe in intentional and I believe in non-intentional curses. I believe you can curse people. I certainly believe you can curse places. As I study energy work a lot, it's very interesting to look at the idea of the curse, especially on buildings. So I fully believe in curses.
Oh, there are definitely places that feel cursed. And I've gone to a few places and I can say, what's going on here? This is not good. This doesn't feel good. And you get this bad energy. And you feel that too, Beth?
Yeah, it's that weight that settles on you.
Yeah. And I can feel it. And you go, why am I here? You suddenly just feel like this depression settle on you. And it's like a weight. And then you feel great the minute you leave that space. Mm-hmm. And so physical places seem to have this air of like a dark god that rules. Like there's a dark god that rules New Bedford. Every time I drive into New Bedford, great seafood, by the way. I go there for seafood because they have the best Portuguese seafood in the world. But every time I drive there, I feel like, what happened here? And of course, there was a whaling industry. They killed all kinds of wonderful animals there for a long time. Fishing and whaling was a way of life. It still is. Mm-hmm. It's an active port. But whaling was considered kind of a sin. And so it's very interesting when you go there. You can kind of feel it. It's not just the Moby Dick stuff. It's a feeling about it.
In addition to all of the marine life that the sailors killed and the fishermen killed, I mean, lots of sailors and fishermen were lost. And so their spirits are returning there. That was their last port as well. And most of them lived right there near the port. So I absolutely can see why you would find New Bedford to be a heavy town.
It's a heavy town. And it isn't just the poverty. It's something about its history and the weight of the place. Every time I go there, I'm sure there are some people who grew up there that love it. That's my hometown. But for me, I just feel a weight when I go there. And the Fall River too. When I go to Lizzie's house. Fall River is sort of a town that was once really, really big during the garment district time, when the salesman would come up to Fall River from New York. And it was huge at one time. And now it feels like it's a little broken. And it feels like it's a little sad. And so the town has a spirit. And there are great parts of Fall River. There are great parts of New Bedford. I don't want to suggest the whole area is cursed.
Can I throw a shout out to the Donut Factory on Rockaway Ave in New Bedford?
Great place. And the Whaling Museum, one of my favorite places in the world. I go down there every year. And, of course, the Seamen's Bethel. Yeah, New Bedford's a glorious town with the best seafood. But there's just something there. Salem is a weird town, too. Do you visit Salem?
All the time.
Yeah. And it's a town that's trying to exorcise its demons, its ghosts, I think. It's a town where a lot of people are drawn to it to try to, because they feel like there's something there. And yet it's also a town where it's got a darkness to it that you can't deny. And so it's a doubleness to it. Now the idea of curse is really interesting too, because the Greeks wrote about it, this feeling that some people are under a bad star. And some people are just damn doomed. There are some people who are just unlucky. That there's people who can survive whole wars. There's some people who are killed by the very first bullet. You know what I mean? There are just some people whose numbers just are up. And I grew up Sicilian, so all my Sicilian aunts talked about Malocchio, what you talk about, the evil eye. So this was something they all believed in. Of course, every Sicilian lady I knew read cards, and they all read regular playing cards. They didn't necessarily read tarot. Isn't that interesting? And what do you have there, Beth?
Tarot set.
Tarot set. So no, let me see it.
Why is that one?
That's the Crowley. Isn't that the Crowley set?
Oh, it's the tower.
Yeah, but I believe that's the Aleister Crowley tarot set.
No,
It's the
this is
Magician.
that. She's using the Rider-Waite set.
Oh, the Rider-Waite set.
That.
Yeah, very good, very good. I just recognized the tower. It looked very familiar. Yeah, there's so many different tarot art styles and even different cards. So, is that the one you prefer?
This is the one that I use. Yeah.
Yeah.
It talks to me sometimes.
Interesting. How about you, Amelia? Do you do that as well?
I do, yeah. I've been doing it for a while. I use my deck. When I read for people, I always use the Rider-Waite, but I have probably about a dozen decks at home, so all different types.
Yeah, I'm trying to see which one I have. It's not. I can't reach it right now. But yeah. But wonderful. And of course, the tarot deck is based on an ancient ritual, the Holy Grail ritual, and on Arthurian literature. And it was used by T.S. Eliot in his wonderful Wasteland poem. But it's always been a doorway, like the I Ching, for opening up the imagination and opening up the mind to possibilities. Another great ghost story that I'd really recommend is Don't Look Now by Daphne du Maurier. It also was made into a really scary movie back in the 70s, really kind of nightmare movie. But Don't Look Now is about a family dealing with the death of a child. And they want desperately to get a message from their child. And it's kind of a cautionary story about not trying to open up something sometimes. Sometimes you can want a message from your child, and the message might be not the message you want to hear. And so because of your own disposition, you might be drawn into something much darker, much stranger because of that. I'm trying to not spoil the story, but it's about this very basic problem. When you open yourself up to something, what is it that you're opening yourself up to? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it can be very positive and very beautiful. But there are some people, because of their disposition, or because of depression, or because they're in a bad place, they can't listen to the good messages. And so that opens them up to the bad. And so that's an interesting issue with a lot of these spookier stories. Ghost stories are meant to be scary, and Don't Look Now is one of the scariest. And I'm going to just make another pitch for Shirley Jackson. Summer People.
The Summer People. Gotcha.
And Shirley Jackson was a master at telling stories about subtle supernatural realities. Like you have to look at the details to even see something is there. But if you do, you'll notice that there's a spectral, almost curse-like force at work. Summer People has one of the most interesting premises of a short story. It's just about a couple that decide to stay a little too long at the lake, at the vacation spot. They stay after the season is gone. You know how you're all supposed to pack up and go home on Labor Day? Mm-hmm. They don't. And when they don't go home, they open up something very dark. And it's one of the scariest stories. I'm not sure if there's a ghost in it, but there's definitely this feeling of something in it. Mm-hmm. And you feel this all the way through. Shirley Jackson was great at this. You have to read her and be very sensitive to what she's saying, and you start to feel a lot more. There's a lot of darkness in her stories, but a lot of wonder as well. So yeah, that's a lot of some of my favorite ghost stories. You can't stop reading Edgar Allan Poe. Though he doesn't write ghost stories all the time, his great ones are classics. I don't think The Telltale Heart is a ghost story, and I don't think Cask of Amontillado is a ghost story, but Fall of the House of Usher definitely is. It's a really great ghost story. And kind of a zombies. The zombie school of literature, those scary stories were all invented by one fellow named Richard Matheson. He wrote a story called I Am Legend, which was the basis. Yeah, it's the basis of a movie, three different movies: The Last Man on Earth, The Omega Man, and the Will Smith movie I Am Legend. And in that movie, they're all chemically created vampires that eat and drink human flesh. Um, and that really is where the zombie genre began. But Richard Matheson, before he wrote I Am Legend, also wrote for the Twilight Zone. And he wrote some of the great spooky stories of the Twilight Zone, the great Rod Serling, who loved ghost stories and told a whole bunch of them about haunting. And so one of my favorite things in the world is to watch old Rod Serling Twilight Zones and step into that other world, the world of the Twilight Zone, where things aren't ordinary and aren't natural. They're supernatural.
This has been phenomenal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have learned so much.
Right.
And I am excited to actually read some of these because now, we're about to head into a long winter and people are going to have a lot of time to read. So I think these are some great things.
Thank you.
Great stories.
And what I'll tell you is, if you ever want me to come back in a year or so, and I'll give you another 10 or another 15 great ghost stories. There's so many. I could fill up hours with, but that's a good start right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have you come back. How's next week?
And you should also think about having a Christmas Carol read this year with your family or friends. Make sure you read the greatest ghost story ever written, and it really is the greatest ghost story, and it is scary at parts too. It isn't all Christmas. It's really splendid. A Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's great.
That's a good idea, and that's something that you can do like over Zoom with a bunch of different family members in different places, too. So.
Yeah, there's a weird story about Charles Dickens. I don't know if I think we're out of time, but just real quickly, there was a wonderful writer, Edmund Wilson, wrote an article called "The Two Dickens," and what it is that Charles Dickens was in many ways Scrooge, the miser, and in many ways he was Scrooge, the generous man who. You meet at the end of the story. He was both because he had he was abused as a child. And what the formula for making an Ebenezer Scrooge is abandonment and the idea that you have to hold on to something material, because you couldn't hold on to anything else. And so because he was left totally alone, he had to hold on to money. And that's why he couldn't love, because he just was he held on to the material world. And he was deadly in his rationalism as well, because he just held on to that physical world. But he was haunted by too much. It started to accumulate. All the things that he was denying over the years started to build up and build up and build up. And so Ebenezer Scrooge had a visitation, and it was a long time coming. It's like somebody was trying to push away something for a long time, and it needed to come to him. So in real life, Charles Dickens was miserly. He was one of these rich people, and he was crazy rich. He was rich as the Beatles in his time. He was the richest author who ever lived, and yet he was one of these rich people who knew where every penny was, where every investment was. One of those rich people who had a mind for money.
Mm-hmm.
He was like a penny pincher. And when his brother-in-law came to him and said, "Can I have a loan?" Charles Dickens said, "You can work." And he wouldn't give his brother-in-law money, even though he was crazy rich. So people thought he was a miser. But what he did with his money, and this is a great lesson, was the other Scrooge, the Scrooge that you meet at the other end of the story. He made halfway houses for pregnant mothers, and he used his money to take care of the poor, and he threw incredible Christmas parties, and he took and he contributed to orphanages. So guess what? The Charles Dickens you meet at the is both of the people. He's writing about himself in some way. So thank you so much.
So thank you so much for coming. And as we were talking about the tarot cards, I actually pulled one just to see what was going on and see like what the kind of what the feeling was.
It's the King of Swords.
It is. Steve, you're the King of Swords.
Thank you.
You're the King of Knowledge.
Ah,
there you go.
Well, I love, what is it? The line of the Gospels, I come not to bring peace but the sword, which is about dividing, one kind of world from the other, so that's an interesting thing. Yeah. Have a great day, all right?
Do you have anything you want to plug before you go?
Oh, before I go, I am working on. Oh, I just did Haunted Hingham. I wish I'd done this a little bit earlier, but I was doing
Yeah,
tour
I
guide
wish
work.
I knew. I would have gone.
But then coming up, I'll be doing a Zoom production of the. Well, no, actually, I'm going to start Zoom rehearsal for a show that we hope will be live after vaccinations go on in April or May. The Gin Game, and I hope to be in that as a performer. And then I'll be directing Guys and Dolls next spring, hopefully if the vaccinations come through in time. And so if the world comes face to face again, I'll be directing all sorts of plays. And as for writing, well, I'm writing right now a play called Goblin, which is a horror piece, which I hope to produce in Boston soon, and with some of my friends who work in Boston.
Cool.
So, all right.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Are there any plans to bring the Lizzie Borden play back?
It's already been revived by a couple of people. I mean, somebody just bought the rights for it and did it with a kids group down in Middleborough. So local groups are doing it. I hope to do it again in a few years. We give it about 10 years rest every time.
Okay.
But I would love for you to see it. I spent a lot of time researching it. I got all the familiar characters in. Andrew Borden, brother, Sarah's brother, and Emma, Lizzie, all these. They're all like people to me now because I've written them as characters, and I've seen actors portray them over and over again. So it's really kind of wonderful. Do you think she did it? Do you think the poem is right? Lizzie Borden took an axe? That's what happened.
Oh yeah, she did it.
She did.
Totally
I think so. Yeah. Her father was one of the nastiest people I've ever read about. So when you went there and you did they told you about some of the ghost stories upstairs, right? And some of the nearby ghost spectral occurrences, like the house is haunted, not just by the Borden family, but by ghosts that might have died next door or something like that. Have you heard about this?
No. Oh, did you?
Barry Corbett of the Boston Paranormal Investigators, he told me a little about that and said some local people have actually caught some evidence in the house of not of the Borden family, but of the ghosts coming over from the graveyard.
Yeah, the ghosts from the graveyard, that's it. And I don't want to say what that is, but that's a really interesting story. And then the other thing is Lizzie has another house where she lived with her lover, who was an actress. And the rest of her life, she had a really, it's up on the hill. So a friend of mine actually.
For sale.
Yeah, it's for sale. I got a tour of it.
Oh,
I got a tour of it by the people who are selling it. So I've been in both.
Did you pretend to be interested in buying it? Or did you just ask for a tour?
Oh, it's such an old, magnificent Victorian house. Nothing bad happened there. That would be a heck of a house to own, honestly. All right.
Are you planning to teach the literature of the supernatural course in the spring?
Yes, I am. I am planning. I'm hoping they grant my wish, but I just put it in as my preference. And I can update you in the future and make sure to confirm that I will be teaching literature of the supernatural. I show some movies in that class as well. I've shown some very scary ones, including The Babadook, which is probably one of the scariest movies I've seen recently. And I show also a really romantic ghost story. We didn't talk about romantic ghost stories, but paranormal romance didn't start with Twilight. You know what I mean? There's a wonderful film called The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, which I think is on Turner Classic Movies this month, if anybody wants to see it. It's my favorite ghost movie story. And it's not scary. Well, not really, no. It's great for kids. It's a romance. It's a ghost romance. And I really recommend it. Have you seen The Ghost of Mrs. Muir?
No.
If you have Turner Classic Movies or you can find this movie, watch it right away. Give me a report. Tell me what you thought, all right? It's called The Ghost of Mrs. Muir. Stars Gene Tierney and Rex Harrison. It's really great.
All right. Well, we'll have to check that out.
Sure thing.
Absolutely.
This has all just been so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So,
all
Steve,
right.
Thank you so much. And
It's been my pleasure.
We'll talk soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was great fun.
That was amazing. And I am so happy that he took the time to come and talk with us.
Yeah, that was wonderful. So thank you so much to Professor Steve Dooner.
Yes.
Playwright Steve Dooner.
And Actor Steve Dooner.
That was incredible. I really did learn a lot. As I've mentioned many times, I don't love to read, but now I feel like I want to read.
And isn't it
For
great when
fun.
people give you like short story suggestions too? That
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm a big reader, but I have a lot of trouble lately committing to like reading a whole book. I have a whole stack of ghost books that I'm like, yeah, I get through like the first 2 chapters and Facebook calls me.
Yeah, I'm excited to read The Judge's House by Bram Stoker.
Right. I am very interested in reading the couple of Shirley Jackson stories that he mentioned. I feel like I've already read Summer People.
I don't know.
That sounds really familiar. And then the other one that he mentioned as well, about the meteor that crashes and drives the family insane. Like that to me.
H.P. Lovecraft. I would be very surprised if you hadn't read any H.P. Lovecraft. So I'm sure you have.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, folks, that was I was telling Amelia earlier, I have been through a lot of college, and Steve was one of my very first professors, and he has always been my favorite. He's engaging, and if you couldn't tell, he is so passionate about the things that he loves and that he loves talking about. And yeah, he would be up teaching and he'd start singing Greensleeves, or he'd be reading somebody, love letters between a husband and wife in one story, and he just started crying. And it's just, he has so much attachment to these different stories that he reads and teaches about, that it's so wonderful to just go and take a class with him. So if you do have a chance to take a class at Quincy College, look for one that Steve Dooner is teaching.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for listening tonight. We really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed this bonus episode and you have some good stuff to look forward to in between to keep your life spooky before we come back for season 4. As always, please leave us a 5-star review on the Apple iTunes store, and check us out on Facebook.com/Ghost Hunting in New England, on Instagram @Ghost Hunting in New England, and on Twitter @GhostHuntingNE.
You can email us, ghosthuntinginnewengland@gmail.com. And if you're going to send a carrier pigeon, please keep it to yourself and just send it by email. It is 2020, and we don't want your coronavirus on the mail. I am smiling and laughing as I say that, but we don't have an address anymore that you can mail us stuff to.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much for listening. And as always,
happy hunting.
Good episode. That was fun.